Welcome, it is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. If you haven't already, please click the subscribe button as we try to build this thing up. The goal is 1,000 subscribers by the end of the Packers season, setting that bar pretty high. We're going to get right into the meat and potatoes of this one. Packers 53-man roster prediction. That time has finally arrived. Training camp done, preseason in the books. You get that little time off before, the end of the exhibition games, the end of training camp, and then the week 1 date at Lambeau Field against the Detroit Lions. I'm going to give you the final 53-man roster that I came up with. That it's a mix of what I think they'll do, what I would do. Of course, my opinion holds no weight, right? But it's what I think they'll do, what I would do if I were in those shoes at 1265 Lombardi Avenue. And then we'll get into some of the, the secondary stuff, the tertiary stuff, some of the cuts that I made, why I made them, who could end up on the practice squad, things of that nature. So here we go, Packers 53-man roster prediction. And please let me know what you agree with, disagree with. This is usually a pretty hot topic as far as people standing firm on their beliefs on who should make it, who shouldn't make it when it comes to sort of the back end of the 53-man roster. So we'll start with quarterback. It's very easy. It's Jordan Love. It's Malik Willis. I can't really make a case for a third. On the active 53-man roster to start the season, it's Jordan Love. It's Malik Willis. I will say I've seen enough of Sean Clifford. I think that has sort of run its course. I would put Taylor Algersma on the practice squad. I would try to develop him, see how much development you can get out of Algersma. I think he's a fascinating prospect. Do I ever think he'll be a QB1, a starting quarterback, one of the best 32 in the world to do it in the National Football League? Probably not. Could he be a backup? Maybe you're able to stretch it that far. I just think with Sean Clifford, you tried to develop him. You know what you have at this point. And for all those people that bring up, well, in an emergency, Sean Clifford should be the quarterback 3. He knows the offense better than Algersma, things of that nature. If you're down to your third quarterback for an extended period of time in the National Football League, you're screwed. 99.9% of the time, if you are going to QB3, if you're breaking the emergency glass and you're bringing out Sean Clifford, or it's not just Clifford, it's any QB3, and you're elevating them from the practice squad to start, you're in trouble, for a prolonged period of time. So to me, it's Love, it's Willis. I feel for Sean Clifford, but he had every opportunity. He had every opportunity last year to win the backup spot. He and Michael Pratt neither, rose to the top of that competition. They go out, Green Bay and Goody. They trade a late-round selection for Malik Willis. That has worked out splendidly, and I just think it's run its course with Sean Clifford. I don't think you can milk that anymore. So I'm going with Algersma on the practice squad, Clifford gone, and then it's on the active roster too, and it's very obvious it's Jordan Love, it's Malik Willis. I can't see any situation where Green Bay keeps 3 on the final 53 coming out of this thing. Running back, I think before the hamstring injury for Marshawn Lloyd, this was a very, very interesting position to look at. It would have been Josh Jacobs, Marshawn Lloyd, and then I think they could have gone either Emmanuel Wilson or Chris Brooks if they wanted to. Green Bay could have gone with all 4. Now with the hamstring injury and it lingering for Marshawn Lloyd, and as Matt LaFleur said, he's going to miss some time, I think this is pretty cut and dried. It's 3. It's Josh Jacobs. It's Emmanuel Wilson. It's Chris Brooks. You put Marshawn Lloyd on IR to start the year, designated to return IR, and he misses 4 games and he comes back. With all these injuries piling up in less than 2 years now for Marshawn Lloyd, everyone's excited to see what it will look like because we see little glimpses in training camp. You see that 33-yard catch on a wheel route against Indianapolis in the preseason. You see that burst. You see that change of pace, that home run capability from Marshawn Lloyd. And that's the reason, one of the reasons Green Bay took him in the 3rd round last year. But you're at a point where you have so many injuries, you're not rushing this guy back. If Marshawn Lloyd, they go into to next week and they're like, he's probably going to miss at least a couple of games. At that point, put him on IR, let him try to get to as close to 100% as he can, and then bring him back. So I think what makes the most sense is you keep 3 running backs on the final 53 initially, and it's Josh Jacobs, Emmanuel Wilson, and Chris Brooks, and you put Marshawn Lloyd on IR, designated to return. He misses 4 games. Where it really gets interesting, and I had a video on this last week, Israel Abanikanda, I think should be on the practice squad. Amar Johnson, potentially as well. Maybe you keep 2 on the practice squad. I'd mentioned then it becomes a number game, right? Like once Marshawn Lloyd's back, you want 4 running backs on the active roster, chewing up those spots, and an additional 2 on the practice squad. And then it's 6. That's a big number. But I think Abanikanda should make the practice squad. Some people are even trying to make a case for him being on the initial 53 until Marshawn Lloyd returns. I don't necessarily see that happening, but there is a spot on this practice squad for Abanikanda, in my opinion, and perhaps Amar Johnson as well. But running back, pretty simple to me because of the injury to Marshawn Lloyd, which sucks. It's Jacobs, Wilson, Brooks. You put Lloyd on the shelf. He misses the first 4 games, and then hopefully can string together a healthy stretch during the 2025 campaign for Green Bay. Receiver, very, very interesting. It's Mitch Hyam on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Building this thing up. We want 1,000 subscribers. That's the goal by the end of the Packers season. Receiver is very interesting. What's obvious is Christian Watson will start the season on the PUP list. Watson physically unable to perform list. Maybe he's back in October, November. The injury came week 18 against Chicago, tore an ACL. By all accounts and all the dialogue we're hearing, it sounds like Christian Watson's ahead of schedule. Green Bay obviously is not going to rush him back. Watson will start on the PUP list. That is what is obvious. I kept 6. I kept 6 wide receivers. I know some could maybe make a case for 5. Others could make a case for 7. I sliced it right down the middle and went with 6. And there's 5 very, very, very obvious ones. Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, Matthew Golden, Savion Williams. That's 5 right out of the chute. You have Doubs, who's probably at the moment I'm saying going into the season, Doubs is probably Jordan Love's most reliable weapon in the wide receiver room. Jaden Reed obviously not going anywhere. Dontavian Wicks not going anywhere, even though Wicks has missed large portions of the offseason. Reed was in a boot the last couple of weeks. Don't know his status for week 1. And then you have your first-round pick, Matthew Golden, who has dazzled in just about every situation so far. And I do believe by the end of this season, we will be looking at Matthew Golden and saying that's the best wide receiver. He might be a wide receiver 1 when we talk about things in terms of the National Football League. And then you have your third-round pick, Savion Williams, who has missed a lot of camp as well, but he's not going anywhere. Those 5 are locks. It really, to me, comes down to, a lot of people, maybe Shepard ends up on your practice squad. I don't think it's a viable case to make that he makes a final 53-man roster spot for Green Bay. I think it comes down to Malik Heath and Mecole Hardman, and this might surprise some. I went with Malik Heath, and that differed from my first final 53-man roster prediction that we did way back when coming out of OTAs. And so I was kind of looking back, and, my running back prediction was different too at that time because Marshawn Lloyd was healthy coming out of OTAs. So that differed. Wide receiver, I had Mecole Hardman on the one coming out of OTAs. Now I have Malik Heath, and here's why. I think Green Bay, it doesn't want to look around and say, man, if we get rid of Mecole Hardman, who's returning punts for us? But when you look at the reps that Mecole Hardman had during the preseason, it wasn't that pretty, and it started in horrific fashion against the Jets, where he had 2 miscues on back-to-back punt returns in your first preseason game. One where he was backpedaling and received it inside his own 5 and was immediately taken down, and another one where he let it bounce a couple times, then tried scooping it up, looked uncomfortable, muffed it, and the Jets recovered at the Green Bay 9. And so, I guess you could say like, oh, it got better. Well, it kind of just went back to the bare minimum of what you would expect Mecole Hardman to do in his reps at punt returner. But if you're the Packers, do you really look at this and say, man, if we let go of Hart, because I think that would be his role. If Mecole Hardman makes this final 53-man roster, and I wouldn't be shocked if he did, I really hope as I'm recording this video, I'm going to get it put out right away, right after I record. I hope there's no moves made before that. And there potentially could be, you don't know. But I think if you're the Packers and you're like, man, what do we do at punt returner if we get rid of Mecole Hardman? Because I do think that would be his role if he makes the team. But it wasn't that great. Like, I think it's not ideal, but you could pivot back to putting Jaden Reed back there. I just think there's options. Maybe like a Corey Ballantyne, if he makes it. We'll get to cornerbacks in a little bit. Maybe Keyshawn Nixon, even though you'd probably rather have him just stick to kick returns. I don't think with what we saw from Mecole Hardman, it warrants a roster spot, or Green Bay saying, let's just give him one because he'll be our punt returner, and then we can check that box when the reps he got at punt return this preseason, this summer, weren't great. So I'm not going to give him a roster spot just because without him on the roster, now you have somewhat of a hole or a question mark at punt returner. Figure it out. I'm not going to give him a roster spot when I don't think he earned it. And so I gave it to Malik Heath, who I thought looked more comfortable in the offense. He had a couple of wretched drops in the preseason in that game against the Jets too, but I went with Malik Heath. I think until Christian Watson gets back, that's a guy who, if he needs to play some snaps, you feel more comfortable with Malik Heath in this offense than you do with Mecole Hardman at this point. And Mecole Hardman really had a chance to punch his ticket on this team, on special teams, specifically in punt return. He just didn't do it. And so I cut Mecole Hardman and I kept Malik Heath. So my 6 wide receivers are Dobbs, Reed, Wicks, Golden, Williams, and Heath. And then obviously when Christian Watson comes back, if you're healthy at wide receiver at that time, you put Watson on the active roster, and I would assume Heath gets snipped in and potentially ends back up on the practice squad. Offensive line, another really, really interesting position. You could keep 9, you could keep 10. I guess you could keep 8. I don't think they will do that. I ended up at 9 offensive linemen for Green Bay, and on my initial one coming out of OTAs, I had 10. I had 10 at that time. So I trimmed it down, and we added somewhere else. We'll get to that in a little bit. So I kept 9 offensive linemen. I think most of them are pretty obvious. And then the last 2 kind of more subjective, as far as your takes on who you would have taken those spots. But it's Rasheed Walker. It's Jordan Morgan. I'm interested to see who starts at left tackle in week 1. Jordan Morgan had a phenomenal preseason for the most part, especially in his latter outings, and just seems more and more comfortable at left tackle. I think that is your future left tackle for Green Bay as late as next season, as early as this season. But Rasheed Walker's 1. I'm not listing them in order. We're getting to 9. Rasheed Walker 1, Jordan Morgan 2, Aaron Banks 3. The injury that he has, what is a back injury that's lingering, does worry me somewhat for his status for week 1. We'll have to see. But Aaron Banks is certainly going to be on the final 53-man roster. Elton Jenkins makes it 4, Sean Ryan 5, Zach Tom 6, Anthony Belton 7. And those are the 7 that are just concrete locks. I did put Jacob Monk in this group on the final 53-man roster. Thought he struggled, somewhat of a roller coaster ride this summer when you were hoping to see maybe more signs of consistency from him, but I think he makes the roster anyways. And then I put Donovan Jennings on it. I thought it was interesting that I know it's the 3rd preseason game and you don't really know what to expect, who's going to be out there, who's not going to be out there, but Matt LaFleur rolled with a lot of the starters for some part of that game, and Donovan Jennings got a nod to run with the ones, and I thought I didn't think that was like by coincidence. I thought they wanted to see what Donovan Jennings could display and whether it held up with maybe some of the things they've seen this summer. And I have Donovan Jennings making the final 53-man roster, which might surprise some of you because I have Kadeem Telfort getting cut, and then on the PUP list, John Williams, who's been there all off season anyways. So 9 offensive linemen: Rasheed Walker, Jordan Morgan, Aaron Banks, Elton Jenkins, Sean Ryan, Zach Tom, Anthony Belton, Jacob Monk, and Donovan Jennings. Tight end. This was very, very tough for me, and John Fitzpatrick won the number 3 spot. Like, John Fitzpatrick's making this team. Whether, you don't believe it or not, I'd be stunned if John Fitzpatrick wasn't the number 3 tight end. And this was, so I went through how I did it, put down like all the guys that, I think could make it, and then I just start trimming down. And when I got to 55 and I had to get to 54, it was really tough. And when I had to get from 54 to 53 and then cement it in, it was even more tough. So I went with 3 tight ends. I went with Tucker Kraft, Luke Musgrave, John Fitzpatrick. And not that this matters, but when I was going my 54 to 53 to get to the 53-man roster, to do that, I sliced off Ben Sims. Like, that was and I didn't want to do it. I think there's a spot for Ben Sims. He can play some special teams. If he makes it as a 4th tight end, he's not going to be out there much on offense unless there's injuries. You have those injury questions with Luke Musgrave after he's missed substantial time in his first 2 seasons. And you really have to try to weigh, like, do we keep a guy on the final 53 and give him a spot just for depth purposes because we're worried maybe that Luke Musgrave gets hurt? Like, that's hard to justify and even harder to try to predict, even though some players, as we come to know, are more injury prone than others. I kept 3 tight ends: Kraft, Musgrave, Fitzpatrick, who I thought won the number 3 battle over Ben Sims. But I think that was the toughest one for me to cut down because it was from 54 to 53. I did so by cutting Ben Sims out of the picture. I think he could end up back on the practice squad. But if you're out there and you're like, I think they keep 4 and Ben Sims is the 4th, completely understand. I can see a case being made for that. Totally justifiable. If you have 3 and you're cutting Fitzpatrick out, I would say I just don't see it based on everything we've seen all summer, heard all summer. I think Fitzpatrick won that job pretty cleanly. Defensive side of the ball now. This was tough. We'll start right away with the interior of the defensive line at defensive tackle. Mitch, I am on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Always appreciative of all the support. I kept 6, and if we're being honest, it came down to me for do I want to keep 4 tight ends and 5 defensive tackles, or do I want to keep where maybe it gets a bit repetitive, or do I want to keep 6 defensive tackles and 3 tight ends? And here's where I justified it for myself and where you might disagree, and it's completely fine. I kept 6 defensive tackles: Kenny Clark, Devontae Wyatt, Carl Brooks, Colby Wooden, who I think there's a chance he's actually on the chopping block. Was he a 4th, 5th round pick a couple years ago? But I had Colby Wooden making it, and then I had both Georgia guys: Warren Brinson, who they drafted in April, Nazir Stackhouse, UDFA, who has impressed at times. I know it can seem like it gets a bit repetitive. Like, do you want Nazir Stackhouse, who kind of just stuffs things up, clogs things up on the interior? Do you need another guy like that, or could you run with 5? I think you could run with 5 and maybe have Nazir Stackhouse on the outside looking in. My problem with that and how I justified it, I think if you cut Nazir Stackhouse and put him on your practice squad, he might get plucked by another team. And so that's why I was like, I think it's more likely you could keep Ben Sims on the practice squad and let it slide by and maybe no one picks him up than it is with Nazir Stackhouse. And so that was my justification for it in part. I like Nazir Stackhouse enough where I was like, I don't want to risk that. I don't want to risk putting him on the practice squad and we get a few weeks into the season and someone says, we will take that and put him on our active roster, and now he's gone. And so that's why I kept Nazir Stackhouse as the 6th. I know it can be somewhat repetitive. There is a trend, and trends always get broken at some point in time. Streaks always get broken at some point in time. But I do think it's interesting that the Packers have had one UDFA make the final roster every season since 2005. I keep Stackhouse this time. That streak lives on for another year. So I kept 6 defensive tackles. And again, for me, it came down to, do I go with 5 and then 4 tight ends, or 3 tight ends and 6 defensive tackles? And I know it can get repetitive having those guys that just clog up the interior. But I didn't want to. I didn't want to risk putting Stackhouse on the practice squad and seeing him swooped up by another team at some point in the season and added to their active roster, like what the Packers did with Rasul Douglas a few years back when they took him off Arizona's practice squad, turned into an absolute gem of a decision by Goody and the rest of the brain trust for the Packers. So I did keep 6 defensive tackles. Again, let me know what you think in the comments, because I'm sure many of you kept 5, maybe you cut Wooden, maybe you cut Stackhouse, maybe you cut Brinson. But I ended up keeping 6, including both of the Georgia boys on the back end of that. Defensive end, very, very, very interesting. I know this one will get a lot of disagreement on, and that's, again, totally fine. I kept 5 defensive ends, and it's Rashawn Gary, Lucas Van Ness, Kingsley Enagbari, Brenton Cox Jr. I should start by saying the pup list, Colin Oliver, right? Late round pick out of Oklahoma State this year. He'll be on the pup list where he's been pretty much all off season. So that goes without saying. But I kept 5: Rashawn Gary, Lucas Van Ness, Kingsley Enagbari, Brent Cox Jr., Aaron Mosby. Aaron Mosby as the 5th. And I know initially some of you are going to be like, Baron Sorrell, what the hell? Baron Sorrell sprained MCL. Didn't expect to miss much time. Those were his own words. There's a chance he could be ready for week 1. Maybe, maybe not. Here's my logic. Here's my thought. If Baron Sorrell is on the final 53-man roster entering the season, I have him on IR, by the way. I have him on IR designated to return. He misses the first 4 games. From everything, it sounds like Baron Sorrell will be ready by week 4. And it's Lions, Commanders, Browns, Cowboys, right? Isn't that the order? First 4 weeks, and then you get that early bye, which I hate. Different story for a different day. What I did was I thought to myself, I said, man, if Baron Sorrell comes back from the sprained MCL, and let's say he's out week 1 against Detroit, but then he's ready week 2 on a short turnaround on a Thursday night against Washington, is it likely that he's going to, play a lot right away anyways? Like, he's impressed, right? We've seen glimpses of it throughout training camp and the preseason. I would say, especially against Indianapolis, he had a couple of nice plays, a couple of nice moments. But is it likely that Baron Sorrell is going to carve out a role early on in the season, like a consistent role, and he's going to have consistent snaps every week? Well, when you have Gary and Van Ness and Brenton Cox Jr., who I'm very smitten on, and then Kingsley Enagbari, I don't know if there's going to be a role necessarily on a consistent basis for Baron Sorrell. So why not then give him one of those other IR designated to return spots, misses the first 4 games, and then he comes back and he's really at 100%. Maybe then he carves out a role. To me, it was like, Whether or not he plays week 1 is still in doubt. Would he miss the first 4 games? Probably not. But would he be playing anyways for Jeff Hafley right out of the gates? I don't think so, even though there's a lot of excitement and some giddiness around him, right, from the fan base. And I get that. And I understand it because we see it, right, with our own 2 eyes. I don't think they'll do this, what I'm suggesting. This is one of those where I said this is what I would do if I were the Packers, but I don't think they will. Rayshon Gary, Lucas Van Ness, Kingsley Enagbari, Brent Cox Jr., Aaron Mosby, Oliver on the PUP list, and just let Baron Sorrell heal that thing, get back to truly 100%, and then boom, you have him for the rest of the season. It's not like they're going to rush him back, but again, final 53-man roster, could miss the first game. If he's ready for week 2 on a short turnaround against Washington, is he even going to have playing time then? Probably not, and so put him on IR, make sure that sprained MCL is 100% good to go. Again, you wouldn't be putting him on IR, talking about Baron Sorrell, with the assumption like, man, there's a chance he misses 4 games. Like, I don't think that's the case. Whereas with Marshawn Lloyd, it's definitely in play, which is why I think he'll start on IR, designated to return, and miss the first 4 contests. I just think that's the route I would take with Baron Sorrell. And I would keep Aaron Mosby for the time being. Then, of course, when Sorrell's ready, you bring Sorrell back, and Mosby at that point then likely becomes a casualty, even though he's had his moments too. Linebacker. This will be a debatable one as well. I kept 5. I think a lot of people will have them keeping 5. Some might have 6. There's a couple of things I want to get into with this. So I kept 5. I'll just give you the 5 right out of the chute. It's Quay Walker, Edger, and Cooper. Both should be playing the majority of the snaps for Green Bay defensively, as long as they're healthy this year. Then you have Isaiah McDuffie and Tyron Hopper. Both are making the team. The first thing I want to bring up, Tyron Hopper had a hell of a summer. Tyron Hopper started to look the part, and he put a nice bow on the show against Seattle on Saturday afternoon in the final exhibition tilt for Green Bay at Lambeau Field. I am wondering, should I say, maybe to start the year. I am wondering if Hopper has done enough where Green Bay, I think certainly at some point this season, if he could leapfrog McDuffie and be your number 3. And I had a buddy text me that, shout out checking. I had a buddy text me that, I don't know when it was, a couple days ago, a few days ago. I've had a lot going on, but a couple days ago, a few days ago. And it was an idea that I was actually sitting on a little bit. And then you watch that game against Seattle, and it's like, geez, like, Hopper looks pretty damn good. And I would not be surprised if he leapfrogs McDuffie at some point in the pecking order, maybe as early as week 1 coming out against Detroit. He has been that impressive, to me at least, and probably to the Packers as well. So regardless, McDuffie and Hopper are both making the roster. And then you have Cooper and Walker, so there's 4. I kept 5. I did go with Isaiah Simmons, and it kind of contradicts what I did at wide receiver. I looked at Malik Heath and McCole Hardman. I said McCole Hardman with his opportunities really didn't do much, especially at punt return. And that was his little niche to make the team. And he underwhelmed. And he had a couple of big hiccups right out of the gates against the Jets in that first preseason game. And so I gave it to Malik Heath, more comfortability in the offense and LaFleur's system, more likely to be comfortable and suited in a role where early on, until Christian Watson returns from PUP, maybe Jaden Reed misses week 1, maybe Dontavian Wicks misses week 1. Heath can give you, 8 to 12, 9 to 13 snaps and be just fine in that role. It's a role he's had before. Linebacker, I contradict myself because Isaiah Simmons for most of the preseason was pretty miserable. I thought it was better in the finale of the preseason, but guy that I mentioned, I phrased it as it looks like the game is moving 100 miles per hour for him, 1,000 miles per hour, having trouble diagnosing what's going on in front of him. And Green Bay, I thought, made the right move by, hey, let's bring this guy in and have him just hone in on one position. Let's not say, hey, you might play safety, you might play slot, you might play inside linebacker, we might put you on the edge. I believe there's a role for him on teams with Rich Bisaccia, which we know Green Bay values immensely. Most teams do, rightfully so. And there's something, I don't have any evidence of this. Something tells me, whether it's Hafley, Bisaccia, LaFleur, a combination of the 3, I believe they're going to be too stubborn to just give up on Simmons, that they still see what Arizona saw, what the Giants saw, and what Clemson saw in him coming out of college, and it's this athletic marvel, and how do we get the best out of this guy? And so far, it hasn't worked out for Isaiah Simmons. And again, my justification for getting rid of McCole Hardman was, has he even earned a roster spot? I don't think he has. And I don't think you can keep him and say, well, if we don't, then what do we do at punt returner? I don't think you can do that if you're the Packers. Whereas with Simmons, has he done enough to warrant a 53-man roster spot? Probably not. But I think that's an itch that Green Bay still wants to scratch, to try to figure out if there's anything they can get out of Simmons. Plus, he does carry special teams value. Now, the guy I'm cutting is Christian Welch, who obviously carries an immense amount of special teams value. And if you keep Welch over Simmons, completely fine. If you keep both, completely fine. I went with 5, and this was, I mentioned defensive end we just talked about, and I said, I don't think Green Bay's going to do this. This is just how I would do it. And I would keep Gary Van Ness, Enagbare, Brent Cox, the obvious ones. Then I would keep Aaron Mosby. And I would put Baron Sorrell on IR, designated to return, make sure that sprained MCL is good to go. Probably not going to have a role right away anyways. Let him rest up. IR, designated return, misses the first 4 games of the season. I don't think they'll do that. Linebacker, I went with what I think they will do. I think they keep Isaiah Simmons because they're going to be too stubborn to just give up on it now. And he carries some special teams value. So I cut Christian Welch, that was a tough one for me to go back and forth on. We'll finish up cornerback, safety, special teams. Special teams is obvious. Cornerback, let's actually go safety first because I think it's very easy. I think the number's 5. I can't imagine it not being 5. Xavier McKinney, Evan Williams, Javon Bullard, Catan Oladapo, Zane Anderson. I don't think it's 4 with Anderson on the outside looking in, or Oladapo. That'd be very surprising. I don't think it's 6. Maybe Omar Brown made a push for that, and then he had that lung injury against Indianapolis, which he still hasn't come back from. It's 5. I don't see any other number at safety for Green Bay with how things came to be, how things molded together and took shape, than 5. McKinney, Williams, Bullard, Oladapo, Anderson. Boom. Okay, we check safety. We're down to cornerback because, again, special teams, obvious, right? Let's get special teams out of the way. Brandon McManus is your kicker. Daniel Whalen's your punter. Your long snapper is Matt Orzik. There you go. McManus is your kicker. Whalen's your punter. Orzik's your long snapper. Boom. All right, so we'll finish with cornerback. I could see 5. I could see 6. I can't see 4. I can't. I kept 6, and that's how we finished up to get to 53. I kept 6, and I think there's 3, probably 4 obvious ones. Keyshawn Nixon, Nate Hobbs, Carrington Valentine, the clear obvious ones. I can't, at this point, I don't think they get rid of Bo Melton. I really, really don't. Holds value in special teams, still making the transition from wide receiver to cornerback. I think they've seen enough where they're going to keep Bo Melton on the roster. That was something I was wrong about. I don't know if it was on my 53 coming out of OTAs when we didn't know if he was going to make that, full switch to corner, or if it was going to be a split at wide receiver and corner, what was going on. But I did write an article, I want to say it was a month ago, maybe a month and a half ago. It was it was before training camp started. And I had said, I felt like the move for Bo Melton, from the Packers' perspective, to have him go, or agree to have him go from wide receiver to cornerback, was a last gasp effort to just see if he could get a roster spot. But I thought it was a move of desperation, might be too strong, but I thought it was a move Green Bay was making in accordance, in agreement with Bo Melton, to try to just say, can we do anything to get him a 53-man roster spot? Because we really like this guy and we really like what he brings to the table. And I was wrong there. Bo Melton, if he gets cut, I would be very surprised. So there's your 4. And then things really get interesting. Kalen King, I might be biased towards how I view Brenton Cox Jr., and I might be biased in how I view Kalen King. I was super impressed. Had a nice fumble recovery. I believe it was a PBU in the game against Seattle on Saturday. Like, just instinctual plays. I still go back to the cornerback at Penn State, who after, his second year with the Nittany Lions, everyone's like, this is a late first, early second round pick. And he goes back to Happy Valley, and it's a disaster, and his draft stock tanks. But I go back to that guy that played Big Ten football. It looked so damn good. I think it was his second year. And I'm like, I know that guy's in there. And it's hard to, then parlay that into the NFL and make a living, make a team, and things like that. I get that. And the NFL is a different beast than college football. I think there's something there with Kalen King. And I believe he showed enough this summer that, similar to Nazir Stackhouse, if you put Kalen King on your practice squad, he might not be long for the practice squad before another team comes around, takes him, and puts him on their active roster. And so I kept Kalen King. And then my 6th, Corey Ballantyne. And I was on the fence on this one. I could very well see Corey Ballantyne getting the axe, not ending up on the 53-man roster. I just think there's familiarity there. He spent multiple seasons in Green Bay. As soon as Indianapolis got rid of him a couple weeks ago, Green Bay was right there to pick him up. There's value in having that familiarity with Ballantyne, and he was there last year in Jeff Hafley's system. I just think he's a good depth piece, and he gives you versatility on special teams. I also question, among all the injuries for Green Bay, one that is not getting is Nate Hobbs going to be good for week 1? That is one that is not being talked about, at all. We're is Jaden Reed going to be ready? Is Dontavian Wicks going to be ready? What about Savion Williams? Marshawn Lloyd probably going to end up on IR. We're going through this. Jordan Love's got the little thing on his thumb, whatever you want to call it. It's not necessarily a cast, but he'll be good to go, obviously. But you have all these questions about certain players, and then you're like, oh, yeah, Nate Hobbs has missed a large chunk of the summer. And I think the expectation was he'll be ready for week 1. Just if you asked him, I'm sure that's what he would say. But is he going to be ready for week 1? And if he's not, you probably want a little more depth. And I'm not necessarily looking at this through the prism of just week 1 and keep an extra corner and keep Corey Ballantyne. I think there's genuine value in keeping a veteran like Corey Ballantyne at a cornerback spot that, let's be frank, I have some reservations. My reservations are, can Keyshawn Nixon be a true number 1 in a division that has Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jamison Williams, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, Rome Odunze, DJ Moore? That's a lot to put on the plate of Keyshawn Nixon. Can Nate Hobbs, maybe Hobbs is the guy that becomes a number 1 and has that versatility like Nixon to play on the boundary, on the outside, or in the slot. Can Green Bay get by with what they have? I think so. I like Keyshawn Nixon. I like Nate Hobbs. I like Nate Hobbs when he's not practicing against the Packers. I like Nate Hobbs when he's going against the other team. And then Carrington Valentine, who I think was just a gem of a 7th-round finding a couple seasons ago. But I do have questions about the cornerback room, and I do have questions about the depth. If Hobbs isn't ready week 1, you start Nixon and Valentine obviously on the outside. You put Bullard in the slot. But then do you trust Bo Melton enough to get some snaps in the instance that Hobbs and another corner go down, or 2 of these top 3? Because the top 3, it's one tier up top. It's Nixon, Hobbs, and Valentine, and then your tier 2 and your tier 3 are however you want to mold it together, right? But do you trust Bo Melton to play corner right now in a small role? Probably not, I would say, right? And do you trust Kalen King? I don't. I like Kalen King, and I maybe would trust him more than Bo Melton because he's just played the position longer. And that's where a guy like Corey Ballantyne comes in and gives you value, and you don't have as many question marks because you've seen it before. And he had to step into a spot a couple of years ago where, Eric Stokes, Jair Alexander out, and you're all of a sudden starting Carrington Valentine, a 7th-round rookie, and you're starting Corey Ballantyne at the other spot on the outside. And so that's why I think it's 6 at corner. That number is 6, and Ballantyne makes it as the 6th corner. And so I have Micah Robinson, a 7th-round pick, getting cut, ending up on the practice squad. Kamal Haddon also ending up on the practice squad. That's my final 53-man roster. Quickly, we'll go through it. I should get this done in 60 seconds. Jordan Love, Malik Willis at quarterback. Al Gersma to the practice squad. Running back, Josh Jacobs, Emmanuel Wilson, Chris Brooks. I want Abonaconda on the practice squad. Marshawn Lloyd, IR, designated to return. He'll miss the first 4 games with the hammy. Wide receiver 6, Dobbs, Reed, Wicks, Golden, Williams, Heath. McCole Hardman cut, pup list for Christian Watson. Offensive line 9, Rasheed Walker, Jordan Morgan, Aaron Banks, Elton Jenkins, Sean Ryan, Zach Tom, Anthony Belton, Jacob Monk, Donovan Jennings. Pup list for John Williams, Kadeem Telfort, the notable cut. Tight end 3, Tucker Kraft, Luke Musgrave, John Fitzpatrick. I waffled back and forth on this one. Ben Sims gets cut. Put him on the practice squad if you can. 6 defensive tackles. Went back and forth on this as well. Kenny Clark, Devontae Wyatt, Carl Brooks, Colby Wooden, Warren Brinson, Nazir Stackhouse. He'll be the UDFA to make the final roster. Green Bay's had at least one every year since 2005. Defensive end, Gary Van Ness, Enagbari, Cox, Mosby, the surprise. Colin Oliver on the pup list because I've Baron Sorrell, IR, designated to return. Inside linebacker, Quay Walker, Edgerrin Cooper, Isaiah McDuffie, Tyron Hopper. I'd probably put Hopper ahead of McDuffie at this point, and then Isaiah Simmons, Christian Welch, the notable cut. Cornerback, Nixon, Hobbs, Valentine, Melton, King, Ballantyne, notable cuts. Robinson, Haddon, safety. McKinney, Williams, Bullard, Oladapo, Anderson, special teams, McManus, Whalen, Orzek. Let me know what you guys and gals think. Always appreciative of all the support. We're here now, right? Next game we're talking about is week 1 against Detroit in a couple of weeks. Always appreciative of all the support for the channels. We try to build this thing up. We'll see you next time.